Let's say you open up a Bible and flip right near the back to the Letter of Jude. It's a tiny letter, literally just one chapter of 25 verses long. But right there in the text, the author quotes a piece of ancient scripture, explicitly naming his source. Yet, if you go looking for that source text in almost any Western Bible today, you're going to find a blank space. So today's explainer addresses a pretty massive paradox. A deeply influential ancient text that the Bible officially quotes but doesn't actually contain.
Here is the exact quote from Jude, verses 14 and 15. The New Testament author writes, Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied about these people, and then he delivers this specific word-for-word quotation about the Lord coming to judge the ungodly. This isn't just some vague allusion, It's a direct quotation with a very clear attribution to Enoch. A New Testament letter literally cites this document as the authoritative words of a prophet.
And that brings us to the core question staring us in the face today. If it's quoted as scripture by the New Testament, why on earth is it missing from the Western Bible? Establishing this mystery is the curiosity foundation of our CUTE narrative framework. Curiosity, urgency, tension, and emotion, which will be guiding our explainer today. We are looking at a document that was written before Christianity even existed, was used heavily by the early church, and yet was ultimately excluded from the official library of the Western world. How does something like that happen?
Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to move systematically through this ancient mystery. First, we'll examine the paradox in Jude. Second, we'll look at the actual narrative with the fall of the Watchers. Third, we'll explore the theology of exclusion. And finally, how this text was preserved by Ethiopian Orthodoxy.
Section 1. The Paradox in Jude.
This brings us right to the urgency element of our framework. The Book of Enoch addresses massive narrative gaps that the Book of Genesis leaves completely blank. If you want to understand how the ancient world explained the origins of cosmic evil, there is an urgent need to read what this text actually says, because it answers questions that canonical scripture raises but systematically fails to answer. Notice the precise wording from Genesis 5 here. If you read the genealogies in Genesis, there's a relentless, repeating pattern, right? A patriarch lives a certain number of years, has children, and dies, over and over. But when we hit the seventh generation, Enoch, the pattern suddenly breaks. Genesis states Enoch walked faithfully with God, then he was no more because God took him away. He is the literal only patriarch who doesn't die in the text. To the ancient mind, this meant if he was taken by God without dying, he must have gone somewhere, and he absolutely must have seen the divine realm. He's the ultimate visionary. And the Book of Enoch? That is the account of exactly what he saw.
Section 2. The Fall of the Watchers.
I want you to hear this next section as a tragic, cosmic origin story of evil. Genesis 6 gives us these super brief, cryptic verses about the sons of God taking human women, but it gives zero explanation. The Book of Enoch provides the full, startling narrative. As defined here, the Watchers were a group of 200 angels. Their initial divine job was just to observe and oversee the human world. But they descended to Mount Hermon, totally overcome with desire for the daughters of men. Their leader, a figure named Shemihaza, knew this was a massive transgression of divine order. So he actually convinced his companions to swear a mutual oath together on Mount Hermon, completely binding themselves to this rebellion.
And this brilliantly illustrates the depth of the corruption. Because the angels didn't just take human wives, they systematically corrupted humanity with advanced technology and vanity. Just look at this list. Shemihaza taught enchantments. Barakel taught astrology. Azazel taught men metallurgy, how to make swords, knives, shields, and breastplates, and he showed women cosmetics and jewelry. They introduced forbidden knowledge that the human race was simply never supposed to possess, and it directly caused widespread violence and godlessness.
The consequences of all this were catastrophic. And the text doesn't just summarize this, it narrates it. Listen to this visceral account directly from the source. They became pregnant and bore large giants. These consumed all the acquisitions of men. And when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. These giants were the Nephilim. They consumed absolutely everything, then turned on humanity, and eventually started turning on each other. The earth itself cried out against the violence, and this is exactly why God had to send the flood. It wasn't just a punishment for everyday human sin, it was a necessary remedy to cleanse the earth of this extreme ancient strangeness and deep cosmic corruption.
Section 3. The Theology of Exclusion.
And here is the tension element of our framework. We've got this highly influential text explaining the origins of evil, which was widely read by early believers.
So, why did it become such a profound problem for the developing Western tradition? Well, the crucial point is that you can't simply erase a text this influential. Its traces were everywhere in early Christianity. Take a look at these New Testament references. 2 Peter talks about angels cast into Tartarus in chains of darkness. 1 Peter talks about Christ preaching to the spirits in prison, meaning the imprisoned watchers. The book of Revelation is completely filled with Enochic imagery of fallen stars and cosmic war. Even Paul's instruction in 1 Corinthians about women covering their heads because of the angels makes total direct sense against the backdrop of watchers being lured by human beauty. The early New Testament writers literally operated in an Enochic world. Therefore, excluding this book was a very deliberate institutional choice.
To understand that choice, we really need to impartially weigh these two theological frameworks. On the left, we have the theology of orderly sin, which was heavily championed by Augustine. This framework locates the origin of evil squarely in human choice, the Adamic fall of Adam and Eve. Humans chose disobedience, which led to original sin. It's a very coherent system that requires a purely human remedy. But on the right, the Enochic account locates the origin of evil in angelic transgression, cosmic corruption, and demonic spirits originating from those dead giants. The Western tradition found the Enochic explanation simply too disruptive. I mean, if angels caused the deep corruption, human responsibility looks entirely different, right? Ultimately, the Western canon shows the Adamic account and systematically excluded the unruly Enochic narrative.
Section 4. Preserved by Ethiopian Orthodoxy.
This brings us to the final component of our CUTE framework, emotion. Specifically the emotion of deep time and a profound respect for a tradition that faithfully protected this document while the rest of the world basically turned its back. Let's trace this journey and see how it builds across the millennia. This timeline maps the text's massive historical footprint. Composed in the 3rd century BCE, preserved by the Qumran community in the Dead Sea Scrolls in the 2nd century BCE, gradually excluded by the Western Church around the 4th century CE. And then a massive jump to 1773, when a Scottish explorer named James Bruce retrieves complete copies from Ethiopia. For over 1,000 years, the West honestly thought this text was lost to history forever.
But the absolute truth is it was never actually lost. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church never discarded it, because they developed in a totally different context without the exact same theological pressures that shaped the West. They retained it, actively utilizing it as canonical scripture for 2,000 years. It's literally still read in their liturgy today. When James Bruce arrived at a monastery library in Gondar in 1773, he didn't discover a lost text. He simply visited a library that the West had condescended to and completely ignored for centuries. Ethiopia faithfully kept what the West threw away.
The Book of Enoch shows us that sometimes ancient knowledge isn't buried out in the dirt. It's simply waiting in a library we completely forgot to check. But other times, it's hidden in a much darker way. So what else is hiding in the shadows of the modern antiquities market? In our next explainer, we're going to look at a document bought and sold in secret, nearly destroyed by neglect, that challenges the single most famous act of treachery in history, the Gospel of Judas. You absolutely won't want to miss it.